Think about um, the most talented, completely indispensable person at your company.
Oh, yeah. Everyone has someone who instantly comes to mind.
Right. Or, maybe it's at your nonprofit or even just within your own family. You know the exact type.
The one who's always working like 80 hours a week.
Exactly. The one who swoops in to fix literally every crisis. The person who seemingly holds the entire operation together just with sheer force of will.
The hero.
The hero. And everyone looks at this person and thinks, well, what would we ever do without them? I mean, they are the glue.
Yeah, that's the standard narrative for sure.
But what if I told you that this specific person, this hero, the savior of the project, is actually the single biggest threat to your organization's survival?
It's a massive shift in how we think about things.
It really is.
Mhm.
Today, we're jumping into a deep dive on a document titled 008 Leadership as the True Constraint. And the mission of this deep dive is to unpack this really uncomfortable truth from the text.
And it is uncomfortable, I mean, deeply uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Because it argues that movements don't die because the vision is too small. They stall because the leadership is too thin.
Right. We're so culturally conditioned to celebrate the person carrying the heaviest load. But the source material we are diving into today outlines a completely different reality.
Which is what, exactly?
Well, it makes the case that when movements or businesses or communities stall out, it's almost never a vision problem. The goals are usually inspiring enough. They stall because the leadership structure just cannot carry the weight of that vision.
So the vision basically outpaces the structure.
Exactly. The vision outpaces structural capacity. And what people inside the organization interpret as, momentum, the text argues, is actually just the sound of the engine redlining right before it blows up.
Oh, wow. That is a terrifying visual. But it's so relevant. And for you listening right now, whether you're mid-level manager at a tech startup or a volunteer running a food drive, or even just a parent trying to manage a household without losing your mind.
Which is a leadership role in itself.
100%. This deep dive is going to completely dismantle how you view success, delegation, and control. We're going to look at the psychological mechanics of why we accidentally build systems that crush us.
And more importantly, how to build something that actually breathes.
Right. So to start, the document talks about the bottleneck illusion. To understand how to build a healthy organization, we first have to understand why so many successful ones secretly carry the seeds of their own collapse.
Yeah, the text introduces this concept it calls the bottleneck. And if you look closely at a lot of churches, startups, nonprofits, you'll almost always find a highly gifted, usually very charismatic founder or leader.
The anchor.
Right, the central anchor for every single moving part. They are the sun, and the rest of the organization just kind of orbits them.
I see this all the time, especially in early stage companies. And, the tricky part is, in the beginning, having that central anchor feels incredibly efficient.
Oh, it feels amazing at first.
Right. Decisions happen in real time. If you have a question, you just walk over to the founder's desk. The standard of excellence is strictly maintained because this one obsessive person is personally reviewing, like, every line of code.
Or every marketing email.
Or every sermon, yeah. Communication is crystal clear because there's really only one microphone.
And that creates a really powerful illusion of safety. The people inside feel secure because nothing is left to chance. But the text provides a pretty severe warning about this dynamic.
What does it say?
It warns that over time, this centralized brilliance becomes the organization's fatal fragility. When every dispute, every creative approval, every new initiative has to be funneled through one human being, growth changes its nature.
It stops being a good thing.
Exactly. It stops being a blessing and morphs into this crushing administrative and emotional burden. The organization stops reproducing new life and just starts draining the life out of its tired center.
Which is so tragic. And the text actually outlines the psychological progression of this, right? What it calls the stages of heroic leadership.
Yes, and it's a really subtle trap.
It is. I found this absolutely chilling.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't start from a place of arrogance. It starts from a profound sense of duty.
Right.
Like stage one is the leader looking at a problem and saying, I will carry this because no one else can.
Which is almost always born out of noble intentions.
Yeah.
The leader deeply understands the stakes of the mission. They're terrified of sloppiness, right?
Yeah, they don't want the vision ruined.
Exactly. So they step into the gap to guarantee excellence. But the psychological trap is already set. Because they take over, nobody else learns how to do it.
Which perfectly leads to stage two.
Right, where the leader's internal narrative shifts to, I must carry this because no one else will.
Oh, man. That's heavy.
It is. They begin to feel the isolation of their own competence. They feel alone, they're burdened, and quietly they start becoming resentful of the very people they are supposedly serving.
Which eventually devolves into the final stage. The leader concludes, only I can be trusted with this.
And that final stage is where the structure becomes completely toxic, according to the text, both spiritually and organizationally.
Why is it so dangerous at that point?
Because human beings simply are not designed to be load-bearing walls for divine or organizational movements. A single human frame doesn't have the stamina or the emotional bandwidth to sustain an expanding ecosystem.
It's just physically and mentally impossible.
Right. When a leader believes only I can be trusted, they are essentially playing God. They're assuming a level of control and indispensability that is meant for the divine, not for a person.
You know, it's like having a computer with a state-of-the-art processor, but absolutely no RAM.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, like the processor can handle anything you throw at it in the moment,
Yeah.
but eventually the data just piles up and the whole system completely freezes.
It crashes every single time.
But I have a question about this. Why do these bottlenecks feel so incredibly safe and efficient to the people inside them before they become suffocating? Like, why do followers allow this system to keep going?
Well, the text notes that bottlenecks feel safe because a single leader preserves clarity. They prevent drift, they resolve disputes quickly.
So it relieves the followers of the burden of responsibility.
Exactly. The text calls this spiritual infantilization.
Wow. Spiritual infantilization.
Yeah, which translates seamlessly into what secular psychology would call learned helplessness. Because the leader is doing everything, the environment feels stable, but the community forgets how to chew their own food.
They stop exercising their own judgment.
Right. When a problem arises, their first instinct isn't to solve it. Their first instinct is just to go ask the leader what to do.
So they're literally being trained to be dependents rather than being developed into peers.
Precisely.
Mm.
The leader's overfunctioning forces the followers to underfunction. But the terrifying caveat to this entire setup is that this centralized stability is conditional.
Meaning it only works if everything is perfect.
It only works as long as that one heroic leader never gets sick, never gets tired, never has a family emergency. The moment life interrupts the leader, the entire organization is paralyzed.
Because the muscle of collective discernment has completely atrophied.
Exactly.
Okay, so if this bottleneck is the ultimate organizational hazard, how do we actually dismantle it? The source points us to one of the oldest leadership interventions in history, right? To find the blueprint.
Yes, it looks at the story of Moses from Exodus 18. Moses is arguably the archetype of the well-intentioned but disastrously bottlenecked leader.
Set the stage for us. What's happening in the text here?
So Moses has a legitimate divine calling. He's led the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. He's the undisputed visionary. But his day-to-day reality is a logistical nightmare.
Yeah, the text says, from morning until evening, he sits alone to judge every single dispute for the entire nation.
Think about the sheer math of that. Hundreds of thousands of people forming a single massive line in the desert, waiting for one man to settle their arguments.
It's absolute madness. But the text points out a fascinating psychological blind spot here. He didn't see it as madness, did he?
No, not at all. He viewed his unavailability, his total exhaustion, as undeniable proof of his devotion.
He thought, look how hard I'm working for these people.
Hmm?
Surely this means I am leading them well.
He completely confused his holy exhaustion with actual effectiveness.
Which is so relatable. I mean, how many modern leaders do that exact same thing? We wear our burnout like a badge of honor.
Oh, constantly.
We think, oh, I haven't taken a vacation in 3 years, so that proves my commitment to the mission.
And that is precisely why the text highlights that it requires an outside perspective to break the spell. Familiarity dulls discernment.
Right, so who steps in?
Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. Jethro is an outsider. He isn't part of the daily grind of the Israelite camp. That distance is critical.
Because when you're inside the dysfunction, you can't even see it.
Exactly. To the people inside, the dysfunction just feels like the weather. You don't question it, you just endure it. But Jethro comes in, observes this massive line of people, watches Moses wearing himself down, and he doesn't praise Moses' work ethic.
He critiques the structure.
Yes, he pulls him aside and basically says, what you are doing is not good. He tells him he's going to break himself and the people. But Jethro doesn't just criticize. He offers a new architecture.
And what is that architecture?
He tells Moses to teach the people the broader principles so they understand the vision. But then, crucially, he tells him to appoint capable leaders over groups of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens.
Okay, wait, I have to push back here on behalf of the listener.
Yeah.
Because when I read that in the text, breaking people down into groups of thousands, hundreds, and tens, that sounds like cold corporate middle management bureaucracy.
It does sound like that to our modern ears, yeah.
Right. How is creating a massive org chart a spiritual or loving solution?
Well, the text frames this beautifully. It argues that Jethro isn't creating red tape. He's creating proximity.
Proximity. Okay, explain that.
Think about the alternative. Before Jethro, a person with a minor conflict had to leave their family, walk to the center of the camp, and stand in an endlessly long line. Justice was delayed, which means justice was denied.
So the lack of structure was actually causing massive collateral damage to regular people.
Precisely. Good order is not cold bureaucracy. By breaking the population down into smaller units, suddenly everyone has a leader who is physically and relationally close to them.
If you're in a group of 10, your leader knows your name.
Exactly. They know your context. They can resolve a dispute that afternoon rather than making you wait weeks to see the CEO. And the text explicitly states, that is not mere efficiency, that is love.
That is not mere efficiency, that is love. That is such a powerful quote.
It really is. It shows that wise leadership translates concern into functional architecture.
Because you can have a heart full of love for your team, but if your leadership architecture is a bottleneck, your good intentions just result in neglected people.
Exactly. Distributing the load isn't abandoning the people. It's building a system where they can actually be seen and cared for.
So if you're listening to this, you really have to ask yourself, are you making people wait in a long line for your attention? Are you confusing your personal unavailability with being important?
It's a tough mirror to look into.
Very tough. But, okay, building this architecture of love means you need a lot of capable leaders to take on those roles of thousands, hundreds, and tens. But how do you actually find them?
Right, because if you just hand off critical tasks to people who aren't ready, you haven't solved the bottleneck. You've just decentralized chaos.
The source insists you can't just pick the most talented person in the room. They must be formed.
Yes. The text makes a critical distinction here between training and formation.
This part blew my mind. Walk us through the difference.
Okay, so training is fundamentally about skill acquisition. It teaches a person what to do and how to do it. You can train someone to write code or deliver a presentation.
It's the technical vocabulary of the job.
Right. But training only impacts the surface layer. Formation, on the other hand, is entirely different. Formation changes who a person is becoming. It deals with character, humility, resilience, the capacity to handle suffering.
It reminds me of the difference between downloading a new software app and upgrading the actual hardware of a phone.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Like, you can give someone the software of leadership skills, the training.
Yeah.
But if their internal hardware, their character is fragile, the whole system will literally crash when you try to run a heavy program.
Absolutely, because leadership carries immense atmospheric pressure. The text argues that the divine pattern is always presence before assignment, formation before function.
And the text walks through some amazing historical examples of this hidden formation process, right? It talks about the cave, the field, the desert, and the hidden season.
Yes. And it's important to note that these aren't punishments or delays. They are highly specialized classrooms designed to strip away the ego.
Let's start with the field.
The field represents mundane, repetitive responsibility. The text points to David in the Old Testament. He's anointed as the future king, but he isn't handed a crown. He's sent back to the sheep pastures for years.
He's learning to shepherd in the microcosm before he shepherds a nation.
Exactly. And the text mentions that David fought lions and bears in secret. That specific detail is critical, because when you defeat a lion with no audience, you learn your identity isn't dependent on the roar of a crowd.
So the hidden season purifies your motives. If you skip the hidden victories, you just become addicted to public applause.
Right. And then you have the cave in the desert. Look at Joseph. He had grand dreams of ruling, raw talent, immense confidence. But before the throne of Egypt came the cave.
Being sold into slavery, falsely accused, rotting in a dungeon. Most of us would view that as completely wasted time.
But the text argues the dungeon was the forge required to build the leader Egypt needed. God wasn't delaying Joseph. He was aggressively enlarging his internal capacity. The cave taught him patience.
Because if he had been handed power as an arrogant teenager, he would have used it for petty vengeance.
Exactly. And the ultimate example the text points to is Jesus himself.
Yeah, 30 years in total hiddenness.
Right. No leader had a more urgent mission, yet he spent years in a carpentry shop. And when he finally formed his 12 disciples, it was through proximity, meals, and mistakes before deploying them. Presence before assignment.
So if formation is this crucial, the obvious question is, what happens when we ignore it? What happens when our impatience for results causes us to skip these hidden seasons?
The text calls this the severe danger of premature leadership exposure.
Which happens constantly today. We're obsessed with finding a talented 20-something and putting them in charge of a massive project right away.
We confuse raw talent with actual maturity, and the specific spiritual and relational costs are devastating, according to the text.
What's the first symptom of that premature exposure?
Pride. Pride grows exponentially faster than humility. The leader assumes the applause is for their innate superiority.
But paradoxically, the text notes this is almost always accompanied by intense insecurity, right?
Yes, because their identity isn't rooted. They haven't been forged in trial, so applause becomes addictive and judgment weakens.
Every piece of criticism feels like a mortal threat.
Exactly. And most tragically, it causes intense relational harm. Unformed leaders often dominate their teams, they become defensive, or in ministry contexts, they use spiritual language to avoid accountability.
Which brings us to the two builders parable from the text. I love this part.
It's such a clear visual. You have two builders. One builds incredibly fast, impressive outward finish, shallow foundation.
They throw an unveiling party. Everyone marvels at their efficiency.
Right. But the second builder builds slowly, spends months below ground on the foundation. To a casual observer, it looks like he's wasting time.
But then the storm hits.
And the fast house cracks and collapses. The slow house remains standing.
Okay, but in a culture that demands speed and scale, where we have real urgent problems to solve right now, isn't there a massive risk in moving too slowly? How does the text reconcile urgency with this agonizingly slow formation?
That is the ultimate tension. But the text synthesizes it beautifully. Urgency is not the same thing as wisdom.
Urgency is not wisdom.
Wow. Just because a situation is urgent doesn't mean the right response is premature action. The text argues that delay is often mercy.
How is holding someone back merciful?
Because God is not interested in merely exploiting a person's giftedness. He is interested in sanctifying it. Exposing a person before they are formed might give them a platform, but it will crush their soul.
So it's better to delay a promotion than permanently destroy someone's potential by putting them in a pressure cooker they aren't built for.
Yeah.
Character does not trend. It develops slowly.
Exactly.
So we've dismantled the bottleneck, we've built the architecture, and we committed to the slow work of forming leaders. What does the final healthy version of an organization actually look like in motion?
It looks like a living, breathing network. And the text introduces a massive paradigm shift here, based on Ephesians 4.
The end of spectator ministry.
Yes. In a centralized model, the congregation or the employees sit there and ask, what will the leader do? Believers are shaped to consume rather than contribute.
The leader's the performer, and everyone else is the audience.
Right. But the biblical model flips this. Ephesians 4 says leaders are given to equip the saints, and the saints do the work of the ministry.
So hoarding capacity actually prevents reproduction.
Completely. If a leader keeps all strategic knowledge private or refuses to delegate, they are stunting the body. True success isn't measured by how much one person can hold, but by how much capacity they release into others.
Which brings up the two orchards analogy directly from the source.
It's the perfect summary. In one orchard, the owner insists on watering and pruning every tree personally. It looks neat, but it's totally dependent on one person's health.
If the owner gets sick, the orchard dies.
Right. But in the second orchard, the owner trains a team of gardeners. The capacity for growth is limitless because the load is shared.
It's the difference between being an audience member watching a solo performance and being handed an instrument to join the orchestra. A solo is beautiful, but it ends when the performer runs out of breath. A symphony can play forever.
Exactly.
Look at your own life. Are you sitting in the audience critiquing the solo performer on stage? Or are you actively being equipped to play your part in the orchestra? And if you're the leader, are you handing out instruments or are you hoarding the microphone?
Releasing capacity requires immense trust. Reproduction is messier than control.
But control produces a sterile environment, while releasing power produces a deeply fruitful ecosystem. So to summarize this deep dive, Leadership is not a title to preserve or a gatekeeping function. It's a releasing function. True multiplication requires distributed leadership.
And we have to embrace those hidden seasons of formation to carry the outer weight. The text leaves us with this final thought. The future does not belong to the leaders who hold everything together. It belongs to the leaders who know how to form others, trust others, and multiply what God has placed in their hands.
The future belongs to the multipliers. So think about the space you influence right now. What is one thing you are gripping tightly, convinced that only you can hold it together, that you actually need to let go of today, so that you and the people around you can finally grow? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.